Miller, the guard barked, his voice carrying across the empty yard. Don't think you're just walking out the front. Restraining orders still active? Use the emergency exit around back. Keep it clean. Frank's gaze snagged on Susan and Annie near the main gate, their faces tight with expectation. He was cornered, his freedom a lie, visible only through a chain-link fence, the guard smirked. Some things don't change. Frank Miller steps out of prison after 5 years, under the vast Midwestern sky. He spots Susan, his ex-wife, and their daughter, Annie, waiting by the main gate. A guard, Henderson, points him towards an emergency exit, mentioning the restraining order. Frank takes the back way, needing distance from the expectation in the past. He sees Susan check her watch, her expression uncertain as she waits. Frank understands he's left her waiting for nothing at the main gate. He walks towards the bus station, a quiet resolve hardening his features. The last 6 years blur, the weight of them settling on his shoulders. He remembers Annie, vibrant at 16, before their lives started to unravel. His old life, the big house he's in, feels like another man's faded memory. He recalls the plans he made, the future he thought he was building. The bus ride ahead represents the first uncertain step of his new journey. The gate finally opened, a groan of stressed metal. 5 years to the day since they'd slammed it shut behind him. Now the open Midwestern sky stretched overhead, vast and indifferent. The air felt thin, sharp with an autumn chill he'd forgotten. Frank Miller took a breath, testing its reality, its freedom. The asphalt felt different under his worn boots, no longer the slick concrete of the prison yard. He walked past the administrative building, his meager possessions a small duffel bag slung over his shoulder. That's when he saw them. A woman and a girl stood near the main gate 100 yards away by a dark blue sedan. Susan. Even from this distance, he recognized the set of her shoulders, the way she held herself, a familiar tension in her frame. Beside her, taller now, her hair a shade darker, was Annie, his daughter. She looked 16, maybe 17, her face a mix of youthful hope and something guarded. They were waiting for him. A hand landed on his shoulder, firm but not aggressive. Henderson, the guard who'd processed his release paperwork, stood beside him, a slight smile playing on his lips. Miller, Henderson said, his voice low, friendly enough. One last thing. There's a standing order, restraining order, still active. Your ex-wife, she's out there. You'll be taking the emergency exit out back. Keeps things orderly. Henderson nodded towards the side of the building where a smaller, less imposing gate stood. The one they used for deliveries, for staff cars coming and going, for men who didn't rate a public exit. Frank's throat felt tight. He hadn't thought about the restraining order, not in a long time. It had been part of the initial wreckage, another legal document separating him from the world he'd known. Now it was a physical barrier, an invisible wall erected between him and the people he wanted, or thought he wanted, to see. He looked at Susan again, saw her lift her wrist, checking her watch. A small gesture, but it spoke volumes. She was waiting, expecting him to walk through the main gate, to emerge into the light, as if nothing had changed, as if the past 5 years hadn't carved a canyon between them. He kept walking, veering left, following Henderson's silent direction towards the back exit. He needed distance, needed to breathe this air that no longer tasted of confinement, but felt heavy with expectation and disappointment. The world had gone on, spinning without him, and now he was a ghost walking through its familiar streets. He imagined Susan's growing impatience, the way her brow would furrow, the small sigh that would escape her lips. He could almost hear her father, who would undoubtedly be with her, offering some hollow reassurance. Frank just kept moving. The guard opened the emergency gate for him. A quiet click, no fanfare. Just a man leaving a place he shouldn't have been, through a door no one would see. The small road behind the prison led past a field of dried corn stalks, then met a paved county road. No traffic, just the silence in the crisp air. He walked, his footsteps crunching on loose gravel, heading towards the distant shimmer of a small town, where a bus station sat. A quiet resolve settled over him. 6 years. It had been 6 years since he'd really been free, counting the year before prison when the walls of his life had started to close in. It was all a heavy blur now. The arguments, the mistakes, the legal proceedings, the verdict. He thought of Annie. Annie at 16, before everything went bad, before the words became weapons, before the silences became deeper. She'd been a vibrant girl then, full of a quiet energy, her brown eyes quick to laughter. He'd taught her to change a tire, to cast a fishing line, to understand the way things worked. He'd wanted to build a future for her, for them, a big house in Dens, a quiet cul-de-sac. He'd pictured it all so clearly then, a life of steady progress, building the construction business, securing their comfort. He'd been so focused, so oblivious to the cracks that were forming, small at first, then widening beneath his feet until the whole foundation gave way. The bus station was just a small brick building, smelling faintly of old coffee and exhaust fumes. He bought a ticket with the cash the prison had given him, a one-way trip to a town upstate, far from Dens, far from Susan, far from Annie. It was a long ride, hours strung together on a highway he'd barely remember. Just the first step. The first step in a journey no one, least of all himself, had seen coming. 6 years prior, Frank Miller was a contented software engineer building self-learning robots. He had designed a sophisticated home security system, securing government contracts. His house, a comfortable stronghold, bordered a quiet forest reserve in Dens. Frank, a shy man of 40, was kind-eyed, an avid reader, and a thoughtful conversationalist. He cherished his 18-year marriage to Susan and adored their daughter Annie. Life in Dens was simple, predictable, a good place to raise a family. Sheriff Walt Denton approached Frank, requesting an update for the town's traffic light system. Frank, always willing to help his community, took on the project without hesitation. He invited Walt Denton to dinner to discuss the progress, a typical, friendly gesture. Walt Denton's eyes lingered on Susan, a subtle look Frank failed to notice. The sheriff, known for getting what he wanted, began to fantasize about Susan. This seemingly small favor marked the beginning of Frank's entire world unraveling. 6 years back, the weight of the world felt different. Not heavier, but more settled, like good soil. Frank Miller, 40 then, lived a life of quiet satisfaction. His work, nestled in the intricate logic of software engineering, involved the slow, deliberate construction of self-learning robots. He didn't build them for war, but for intricate data analysis, for government agencies needing to sift through oceans of information. He understood systems, the way components fit, the predictable elegance of code. His house, a comfortable 2-story structure on the edge of the Dens Forest Reserve, reflected this precision. He designed the security system himself, a network of sensors and cameras tied to his own custom software, a smaller domestic version of the systems he built under government contracts. It wasn't just a house, it was a stronghold, a quiet place he had built with his own hands, his own success. The woods behind it offered a backdrop of changing seasons, the rustle of leaves in autumn, the hushed blanket of snow in winter. Frank was a shy man, his kind eyes often hidden behind the frames of his reading glasses. He wasn't one for boisterous crowds, preferring the company of books, the quiet hum of his workshop, or the focused discussions with colleagues. But when he chose to speak, he was a good conversationalist, thoughtful and precise. He'd spent 18 years married to Susan, a woman whose calm demeanor anchored their small world. He adored their daughter, Annie, named after his own grandmother, a vibrant girl of 11 then, full of questions and a burgeoning curiosity. Life in Dens, a town where everyone knew everyone, was simple, predictable. It was a good place to grow roots, to raise a family, to watch the seasons turn. Then, one Tuesday afternoon, Sheriff Walt Denton paid a visit to Frank's home office. Walt was a large man, broad-shouldered, with a booming voice and a reputation for getting things done. He had a way of filling a room, even Frank's carefully organized one. Frank knew Walt casually, of course. This was Dens. Everyone knew everyone. "Frank," Walt began, leaning against the door frame, a faint smell of stale coffee and patrol car vinyl clinging to him. "Got a little issue down at the main intersection. The traffic lights, old system's on its last leg. Keeps seizing up. Reckon you could take a look? Figure you're the man to get it right. You understand all that fancy computer stuff." Frank nodded, pushing his glasses up his nose. He always felt a quiet pride when asked to help the community. He knew the traffic system was outdated, a relic from the 80s. Sure, Walt. I can certainly take a look. No promises on miracles, but I'll see what can be done. He was always willing to help, unaware he was extending an invitation, a seemingly harmless gesture that would become the first thread of a larger unraveling. He was inviting a serpent into his garden, though at the time, Walt Denton seemed nothing more than a local official with a malfunctioning piece of town equipment. A week later, Frank invited Walt over for dinner. It was a typical small-town gesture, a chance to discuss the traffic light project in a relaxed setting, to show appreciation for the sheriff trusting him with the task. Susan had cooked one of her pot roasts, and the house smelled of slow-cooked meat and herbs. Annie was in her room, likely reading or drawing. As Susan moved around the kitchen, bringing dishes to the dining table, Frank noticed Walt's eyes follow her. It was a fleeting glance, a slight pause in Walt's conversation about circuit boards, but Frank didn't process it. He was focused on the technical details, explaining the limitations of the old system, outlining his plans for an upgrade. He saw it, perhaps, but didn't register the weight of it, the quiet hunger in that momentary gaze. He was too caught up in his world of logic and predictable outcomes. Sheriff Walt Denton, a man with a reputation for getting what he wanted, wasn't just observing Susan. In that brief moment, watching her hair catch the kitchen light, the way she moved with a quiet efficiency, a new thought, a nascent fantasy, began to take root in his mind. Frank, oblivious, continued to talk about resistors and power surges, completely unaware that this small favor, this simple dinner, had become the precise moment when the first thread of his comfortable, predictable existence began to loosen, leading to a profound and brutal unraveling. For 6 months, Frank diligently worked on the traffic system, unaware of Walt's pursuit of Susan. Sheriff Denton's charm, or perhaps his authority, slowly eroded Susan's loyalty. Frank, immersed in coding and security projects, remained oblivious to the deepening affair. He completed the traffic project, feeling proud, looking forward to celebrating with Susan. He planned a simple dinner out, a way to reconnect after his long hours of work. The drive home was filled with anticipation, imagining Susan's smile, Annie's laughter. As he pulled into his driveway, an unfamiliar black sedan sat there, parked too close. A prickle of cold unease snaked up his spine. Guests, he wondered, trying to dismiss the dread. He walked into his house, the air heavy, a silence that felt wrong, unnatural. Then he saw them, Susan and Sheriff Walt Denton, in his living room, a scene that froze his heart. Walt Denton, sensing Frank's presence, offered a smug, knowing smirk. Frank's comfortable world, built on trust, shattered in that instant. Over the next 6 months, the rhythm of Frank's life shifted, subtle as the changing light through the forest trees. He immersed himself in the town's traffic system, designing new circuit boards, writing lines of code that would ensure the lights switched smoothly, predictably, for years to come. It was a challenging project, pulling him deeper into the logic, the problem-solving, the quiet satisfaction of building something functional. His government security contracts also demanded his attention, intricate algorithms, layers of encryption. He spent long hours in his office, the glow of monitors reflecting in his glasses, the hum of servers a constant companion. While Frank worked, focused and content, Walt Denton, the town's sheriff, was busy elsewhere. Frank didn't see the extra stops Walt made at the house, ostensibly to check on the traffic light progress. He didn't notice the new casual intimacy that began to seep into Susan's voice when she mentioned the sheriff. Walt's charm, that booming confidence he possessed, slowly, meticulously, chipped away at Susan's quiet loyalty. Or maybe it was his authority, the way he commanded respect, the power he wielded in their small town. Whatever it was, a quiet shift occurred within the walls of their comfortable home. A slow erosion Frank was too focused, too trusting to perceive. He saw only the work, the projects, the elegant solutions to complex problems. The intricacies of human emotion, the deceit, the betrayal were outside his coding. Finally, the traffic project was finished. The last lines of code debugged, the final components installed. The lights at the main intersection now functioned flawlessly, a testament to Frank's precise engineering. He felt a quiet pride, a satisfaction in a job well done for his community. He looked forward to celebrating, to sharing this small triumph with Susan. He pictured a simple dinner out, maybe at the Red Oak Grill, their favorite local spot, a chance to reconnect, to settle back into their rhythm, to share the quiet joy of their predictable good life in dens. He drove home that evening, the setting sun painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. Anticipation hummed within him. He thought of Susan's smile, the way her eyes crinkled at the corners when she was genuinely pleased. He imagined Annie, likely in her room, immersed in a book, oblivious to the quiet world her parents had built for her. He pulled into his driveway, the familiar gravel crunching under the tires. That's when he saw it. An unfamiliar black sedan sat there, parked too close to the front door, too confidently. Not a patrol car, but a personal vehicle. Polished, dark. A prickle of unease, cold and sharp, snaked its way up his spine. Guests, he wondered aloud, the word sounding hollow in the quiet dusk. He tried to dismiss the sudden dread, the irrational fear. Maybe it was a neighbor, maybe a delivery, but the car, solid and imposing, seemed to emanate a wrongness. He got out of his car, his duffel bag of tools feeling suddenly heavy. The front door was ajar, a sliver of light spilling onto the porch. He pushed it open slowly, the air inside his house thick, heavy. A silence that felt wrong, unnatural. The kind of silence that held a secret, a weight. He called out, "Susan, Annie, I'm home." No answer. He walked past the coat rack, past the entryway mirror that usually reflected his own tired but content face. Then he saw them. In his living room, the one with the large picture window looking out onto the forest, sat Susan. And beside her, on his couch, leaned back as if he owned the place, was Sheriff Walt Denton. Susan was sitting stiffly, her hands clasped in her lap, her eyes wide, betraying a flicker of something Frank couldn't quite name. Shame? Fear? Relief? Walt Denton, sensing Frank's presence in the doorway, slowly turned his head. A slow, deliberate movement. His eyes met Frank's, and then a slight, almost imperceptible smirk spread across his lips. It was a look of ultimate victory, of possession. In that instant, the comfortable world Frank had built, the trust he had placed in his wife, in his home, in the predictability of his life, shattered. The pieces fell around him, sharp and cold, cutting through the quiet evening air. Frank's voice, raw with disbelief, tore through the quiet house. "What the hell is going on here?" Walt Denton, unflustered, mocked, "Oh, the little one has learned." Before turning to Susan, "I'll leave you two alone now. You tell him the rules." His words were a gauntlet. Susan, her face a mix of embarrassment and defiance, nodded, twisting Frank's gut. As the sheriff sauntered out, Frank's shock gave way to an icy, calculating anger. "I want you out of the house. Pack your things and leave," Frank stated, his voice flat. Susan's response was chilling. "No, let me have one affair. It won't last long." Then came the brutal threat. "If you file for divorce, I'll take everything, and you'll never see Annie." "You're delusional. You can't possibly think I'd agree," Frank roared, disbelieving her audacity. Susan sighed. "I was afraid you'd react this way. I love you, but I need this, and it will pass." Frank's calm retort was deadly. "Are you the one doing this to me and threatening me? I'm leaving now. I'll be back at 6 this evening. You'd better be gone. I'll never touch you again." Susan lowered her head and walked out of the bedroom, leaving Frank in a broken silence. "What the hell is going on here?" Frank's voice, raw and unfamiliar even to himself, ripped through the quiet house. It was a question that didn't expect an answer, a statement of disbelief and pain. He stood frozen in the living room doorway, the duffel bag still clutched in his hand, its weight forgotten. Walt Denton, still lounging on the sofa, didn't flinch. He slowly uncrossed his legs, a casual, almost bored movement. He looked at Frank, then back at Susan, a slow, predatory smile spreading across his face. "Oh, the little one has learned," he drawled, his voice thick with mockery, a subtle dig at Frank's quiet nature, his perceived meekness. Then, with a casualness that spoke of absolute control, he pushed himself up. "I'll leave you two alone now. Susan, darling," he said, turning back to her, "you tell him the rules." His words weren't a suggestion. They were a gauntlet thrown, a declaration of ownership, a cold claim to Frank's life, his wife, his home. Susan, still seated, avoided Frank's gaze. Her face was a complex canvas of embarrassment, shame, and a flicker of something Frank couldn't quite decipher. Was it defiance? Submission? She gave a small, almost imperceptible nod, a silent agreement. It twisted Frank's gut, a fresh, sharp pain. He watched Walt Denton saunter out of the living room, past him, toward the front door, without so much as a backward glance. The sound of the unfamiliar black sedan starting, then fading, felt like the final click of a lock. Frank's initial shock began to give way, replaced by an icy, calculating anger. It was colder than any grief, sharper than any wound. He walked to the center of the living room, standing over Susan. His voice, when it came, was flat, devoid of the raw emotion from moments before. It was the voice of a man meticulously detailing an error, a bug in a system that needed to be purged. "I want you out of the house. Pack your things and leave." Susan finally looked up. Her eyes were still wide, but now a flicker of something hard had entered them. "No," she said, her voice surprisingly steady, almost calm. "Let me have one affair. It won't last long. It'll be over soon." Frank stared at her, unable to process the words, the casual cruelty of them. He felt a sudden chill, a profound sense of wrongness. Then came the brutal threat, delivered with a quiet certainty that sent a jolt through him. "If you don't, the consequences will be yours. If you file for divorce, I'll take everything, and you'll never see Annie again." "You're delusional," Frank roared, the control he'd tried to maintain shattering. "You can't possibly think I'd agree to that. This is my house. Annie is my daughter." His voice echoed in the suddenly small room. He couldn't grasp the audacity, the brazenness of her demand, her threat. Susan sighed, a slow, deliberate exhalation. "I was afraid you'd react this way," she said, as if he were the one being unreasonable. "I love you, Frank, I do, but I need this, and it will pass. Just let it pass." She spoke of their marriage, their shared life, as if it were a temporary inconvenience, a minor interruption in her own self-serving narrative. Frank took a step back, the icy anger returning, sharper now, mixed with a profound sense of betrayal. He looked at her, truly looked at her, and saw a stranger. His voice was calm again, but with a deadly edge, a quiet menace. "Are you the one doing this to me? Are you the one threatening me? Because you know, Susan, I don't respond well to threats." He let the words hang in the air, a silent promise. He turned and walked towards their bedroom, the place they had shared for 18 years. He began to gather a few things, a small bag, a change of clothes. He couldn't stay, not another minute, not under the roof she had defiled, with the memory of Walt Denton's smirk etched into the very fabric of his home. He emerged a few minutes later, his small bag in hand, and "I'm leaving now," he stated, his voice flat, emotionless. "I'll be back at 6 this evening. You'd better be gone. And Susan, he added, his eyes locked on hers, "I'll never touch you again." Susan lowered her head, avoiding his gaze, a defeated slump to her shoulders. She didn't respond. She just sat there, and Frank, with his small bag, walked out of the living room, out of the house, leaving her in a broken silence. 5 minutes later, Frank was in his car, his mind already racing through legal strategies. He called David Jenkins, his friend and lawyer, demanding an urgent morning appointment. That evening, Frank returned to an empty house, the silence amplifying his profound sadness. The next morning, David Jenkins arrived at Frank's home office, a worried look on his face. Over coffee, Frank recounted the grim details of Susan's affair and threats, and the sheriff's involvement. David listened, his face paling. "Walt Denton? Hell, Frank, that's bad news. He's corrupt." "You have to protect yourself, financially and possibly physically," David warned, his voice grave. Frank's analytical mind, though reeling, found a quick solution. "I'll give you power of attorney. Print the documents now. I'll sign them. If things go wrong, you handle my finances." He handed David a flash drive. "All my information is here. Start the divorce proceedings immediately." David nodded, a grim determination setting in, sensing the battle they were about to face. Just as David was preparing to leave, a loud bang shattered the morning's fragile calm. 5 minutes. That's all it took for Frank to be in his car, the engine idling, the air conditioning blasting. He drove to a secluded spot overlooking the lake, the same lake where he'd taught Annie to skip stones. His mind, usually so clear, so linear, was a chaotic mess of emotion and fractured thoughts. But even amidst the storm, a part of him, the cold, analytical part, was already sifting through data, calculating risks, mapping out legal strategies. He pulled out his phone. David Jenkins, his college roommate, his closest friend, and a shrewd, no-nonsense lawyer in town. Frank scrolled to David's number and hit call. "David," he said, his voice tight, controlled, betraying none of the turmoil inside. "I need to see you. First thing tomorrow morning. It's urgent, monumental stakes." David, sensing the gravity in Frank's tone, didn't argue. "I'll be there," he promised. That evening, Frank returned to an empty house. The quiet was different now. Not the familiar, comforting quiet of a home where everyone was settled for the night, but a cavernous, desolate silence that amplified his profound sadness, his grief. The scent of Susan's cooking still lingered, a ghost of what had been, mocking him. He didn't sleep. He spent the night sorting through documents, meticulously organizing his financial records, transferring digital files to a flash drive, preparing for a war he never imagined he'd fight. The next morning, David Jenkins pulled into the driveway just as the sun was burning off the last wisps of fog. He walked into Frank's home office, his usual jovial demeanor replaced by a worried frown. Frank had coffee waiting. Alexio and strong, over the steaming mugs, Frank recounted the grim details. The affair laid bare in his own living room, Susan's brazen threats, and then the involvement of Sheriff Walt Denton. David listened, his face paling with each detail. He ran a hand through his already disheveled hair. "Walt Denton?" David finally interrupted, his voice hushed. "Hell, Frank, that's bad news. He's corrupt, always has other plans. He's got his fingers in everything in this town. You should really stick around to the end to see how life's costly choices unfold." David leaned forward, his elbows on the desk, his gaze intense. "Frank, you have to protect yourself, financially first and foremost, but also possibly physically. Walt Denton plays dirty. He always gets what he wants." Frank's analytical mind, though reeling from the emotional blow, found its clarity in the face of a new problem. A system to be secured. "I'll give you power of attorney," he stated, his voice calm, decisive. "Print the documents now. I'll sign them. If things go wrong, if I can't handle it, you handle my finances, all of it." He pushed the flash drive across the desk. "All my information is here. Bank accounts, investments, everything. Start the divorce proceedings immediately. I want her out of my life, David, completely." David picked up the flash drive, his expression grim, a determined glint in his eyes. He understood the battle they were about to face, the ruthlessness of their opponent. He nodded, a silent affirmation of his commitment. "All right, Frank, I'll get started right away. This won't be easy, but we'll fight it." He stood up, gathering his papers. Just as he was preparing to leave, a loud bang shattered the morning's fragile calm. It came from outside, a sickening thud against the side of the house, followed by the distant wail of a siren, already growing louder. The front door burst inwards, splintering wood, as 5 uniformed officers stormed into Frank's home office. "Which one of you is Frank Miller?" one officer yelled, his voice echoing menacingly. Both Frank and David were roughly knocked to the floor, caught off guard, their coffee cups crashing. Frank, face down on the carpet, mumbled his identity, struggling to comprehend the assault. "You're under arrest," the officer declared, his tone devoid of empathy or explanation. "For what?" Frank asked, stunned. "As if you didn't know. Your wife and daughter have filed abuse charges." "Abuse? No way! I haven't touched them since yesterday morning." "Whoa," Frank protested, his denial falling on deaf ears. David Jenkins, recovering, quickly intervened. "Frank, keep your mouth shut. Don't say anything." He turned to the officers, demanding, "Where are you taking him?" "To 2nd Street, came the curt reply. As Frank was pushed into the police car, David shouted, "Be careful, Frank! Don't say anything without me." David rushed back inside, securing the flash drive in his office safe, his fiancée, Sarah, watching with alarm. He quickly explained the confrontation, the corrupt sheriff, and Frank's sudden, unjust arrest. The bang wasn't a warning. It was an invasion. The front door, solid oak and carefully maintained, burst inwards, wood splintering with a sickening crack. 5 uniformed police officers, moving with practiced aggression, swarmed into Frank's home office. Their presence filled the room, making it feel small, claustrophobic. "Which one of you is Frank Miller?" One officer, a burly man with a flat, emotionless face, yelled. His voice echoed, menacing and amplified in the sudden chaos. Frank and David, caught completely off guard, were both roughly knocked to the floor. Frank's coffee cup, still warm, shattered against the hard wood, dark liquid spreading across the rug. David's mug followed, a ceramic explosion. Frank landed hard, face down on the scratchy carpet, the smell of dust and spilled coffee filling his nostrils. He felt a knee in his back, pinning him. His mind, usually so quick to analyze, struggled to comprehend the sudden, brutal assault. "I'm Frank Miller," he mumbled, his voice muffled by the carpet, a thread of confusion in his tone. "You're under arrest," the officer declared, his voice devoid of any empathy, any explanation. He didn't even bother to read Frank his rights, just the cold, hard statement. "For what?" Frank demanded, trying to twist his head to see, his confusion rapidly giving way to indignation. The officer laughed, a short, humorless bark. "As if you didn't know. Your wife and daughter have filed abuse charges, said you've been getting violent." "Abuse? No way! I haven't touched them since yesterday morning," Frank protested, his denial sharp, fervent. He tried to push himself up, but the knee in his back pressed down harder. The words felt futile, falling on deaf ears. It was a setup, clear as day. The timing, the immediate, violent entry. This wasn't protocol. This was a targeted strike. David Jenkins, already scrambling to his feet, quickly intervened. He saw the trap, the calculated malice behind it. "Frank, keep your mouth shut," he barked, his lawyer's instincts kicking in. "Don't say anything, not another word." He then turned to the officers, his voice laced with the authority of his profession, despite the obvious power imbalance. "Where are you taking him? Who authorized this without a warrant?" The burly officer just sneered. "Second Street Station. No need for warrants when it's a domestic disturbance. Now move it." He signaled 2 other officers who hauled Frank to his feet, twisting his arms behind him. Cuffs clicked tight around his wrists, cold and unyielding. As Frank was roughly pushed towards the shattered front door, David shouted after him, his voice urgent, pleading. "Be careful, Frank. Don't say anything without my presence. Do you hear me? Don't say anything." Frank, his head swimming with shock and rage, could only nod mutely as he was shoved into the back of a waiting patrol car, the heavy door slamming shut with a finality that echoed in the morning air. David didn't waste a second. He rushed back inside, his eyes scanning the office. The flash drive, the power of attorney, Frank's financial future, his entire life, now rested on those small, digital files. He snatched the drive from the desk, practically sprinting to his own office safe, clicking it open and sliding the drive inside. His fiancée, Sarah, had emerged from the back, drawn by the commotion, her face pale with alarm. She watched him, her eyes wide, a silent question. "They took Frank," David explained, his voice tight, adrenaline coursing through him. "Abuse charges. It's a setup. Walt Denton, that crooked bastard, he's behind this. He knows Frank was coming after him. He's moving first." David ran a hand through his hair, already calculating his next move. The fight for Frank Miller had just begun. David Jenkins sped to the 2nd Street Station, presenting himself as Frank's attorney. The officer on duty, with a dismissive wave, told him to wait, an hour-long delay. Finally, the officer curtly informed David that Frank had been transferred to Forest Lane. An icy lump formed in David's stomach. He recognized Walt Denton's tactics. He raced to Forest Lane, only to be told, after another infuriating wait, Frank was at 2nd Street. David had reached his limit. He pulled out his cell phone and speed-dialed Judge Harrison. He explained the blatant obstruction, the police deliberately moving Frank, the sheriff's involvement. Judge Harrison, listening intently, instructed David to put him on speakerphone. "Mr. Jenkins, is the officer on duty in the vicinity?" Judge Harrison asked, his authority palpable. "Yes, sir, the officer is listening now, with his supervisor," David confirmed, watching them tense. "Gentlemen, this is Judge Harrison speaking. It appears police are preventing Mr. Miller's attorney from talking to his client." 3 broadcasts before noon is a bit much," the judge stated, his voice growing sharper, silencing the officer. David Jenkins drove to the 2nd Street station with a focused fury. He parked haphazardly in the lot, the tires squealing slightly, and practically ran inside. He slapped his bar card onto the counter. "David Jenkins, attorney at law. I'm here for Frank Miller." His voice was sharp, cutting through the usual drone of the precinct. The officer on duty, a young man with a sparse mustache and an air of practiced indifference, barely looked up from his computer screen. "Have a seat," he mumbled, with a dismissive wave towards a row of hard plastic chairs. "Someone will get to you." David fumed. He watched the clock, the minute hand crawling. An hour passed, an hour that reeked of foul play, of deliberate obstruction. This wasn't standard procedure. This was a game, orchestrated by someone who knew how to twist the rules. He knew Walt Denton's reputation. This was a classic tactic. Isolate the suspect, wear down the attorney, coerce a confession. Finally, the officer looked up, a faint smirk playing on his lips. "Oh, Miller? He was transferred. Forest Lane Station. Something about too many detainees here." His tone was curt, dismissive, clearly enjoying David's frustration. An icy lump formed in David's stomach. Forest Lane. That was further out, a smaller, more remote precinct. It was a deliberate ploy, an attempt to delay him, to keep him away from Frank long enough, or for them to do whatever Walt Denton had planned. He slammed his hand on the counter, making the young officer jump. "You knew that an hour ago, didn't you?" he hissed, but he didn't wait for an answer. He spun on his heel and raced back to his car. The drive to Forest Lane felt endless. He pushed the speed limit, his mind racing through legal precedents, through strategies to counter this blatant abuse of power. When he finally arrived, breathless, he burst into the Forest Lane station, only to be met with another infuriating wait. 20 minutes later, a different officer, older and seemingly less pleased with his day, told him with a distinct lack of surprise, "Miller? No, he was sent back to 2nd Street. We don't have the facilities for that kind of situation." David felt a primal roar building in his throat. This was beyond obstruction. This was harassment, a deliberate mockery of due process. He had reached his limit. He pulled out his cell phone, his fingers flying through his contacts. There was only one person in town who could cut through this bureaucratic corruption. Someone who commanded respect and wielded genuine power. He found the number and speed-dialed Judge Harrison. The phone rang twice before a gravelly, authoritative voice answered. "Harrison." "Judge Harrison, this is David Jenkins. I apologize for calling you directly, but I have a serious situation here. My client, Frank Miller, was arrested this morning. I've been trying to locate him, but the police are deliberately moving him between stations. First 2nd Street, then Forest Lane, now back to 2nd Street. It's clear obstruction. I believe Sheriff Denton is directly involved." David's voice was strained, but he forced himself to articulate every detail clearly. Judge Harrison listened intently, a long silence on the line as he processed the information. "Mr. Jenkins," the judge finally said, his voice clear and commanding, "put me on speakerphone. Is the officer on duty in the vicinity?" "Yes, sir," David confirmed, watching as the young officer from 2nd Street, who had apparently followed him, and his supervisor, a captain, visibly tensed. They had been trying to appear busy, but their ears were clearly perked. David held the phone up, putting it on speaker. Judge Harrison's voice, amplified, filled the small station lobby, resonating with an undeniable authority. "Gentlemen, this is Judge Harrison speaking. It has come to my attention that the police department is deliberately preventing Mr. Miller's attorney from speaking to his client. Mr. Jenkins has informed me that Mr. Miller has been transferred between stations no less than 3 times this morning." The judge paused, letting the words sink in. 3 broadcasts before noon is a bit much, wouldn't you say, officer? His voice grew sharper, cutting through the stammering excuses that the young officer tried to offer. Judge Harrison warned, "Mr. Jenkins will have access to an unharmed Mr. Miller, no bruises, no questioning without a lawyer." The sweating officers stammered agreement, the judge demanding their names and badge numbers. David finally reached Frank, finding him bewildered and physically roughed up, confirming his suspicions. Despite David's efforts, Walt Denton's power, Susan's testimony, and Annie's coerced statements proved insurmountable. Frank's advanced security system was twisted into evidence of paranoia and a controlling nature. This trial became a public spectacle, orchestrated by Denton, portraying Frank as abusive. Annie, manipulated and confused, testified against her father, a devastating blow. Frank Miller was found guilty, sentenced to 5 years, stripped of freedom, family, and good name. David Jenkins fought tirelessly, appealing, but the corrupted system remained unyielding. Susan divorced Frank, claiming almost all his assets, fulfilling her threats. Walt Denton, his power absolute, ensured Frank remained locked away. Annie grew up, her perception of her father tainted by lies and manipulation. Judge Harrison's stern warning reverberated through the Forest Lane station, his voice cold and unwavering. Let me make myself clear, gentlemen. Mr. Jenkins will have immediate access to an unharmed Mr. Miller as soon as he enters the 2nd Street station. And by unharmed, I mean no bruises, no accidental falling downstairs, and absolutely no questioning without his lawyer present. Do you understand? The officers, including the captain and the young mustachioed officer, visibly sweated despite the air conditioning. They stammered their agreement, their faces paling under the judge's palpable authority. Judge Harrison, not satisfied, demanded their names and badge numbers, a clear message that he would be following up. The phone clicked off, and the silence that followed was heavy with a new tension, a new fear. David wasted no time. Back at 2nd Street, he was finally granted access to Frank. He found him in a small, windowless interrogation room, bewildered, his shirt a little rumpled, a faint bruise blooming on his jawline. It wasn't severe, but it was there, a testament to the brutality Frank had endured, confirming David's worst suspicions of Walt Denton's subtle, insidious influence. Frank looked up, his eyes a mixture of relief and utter defeat. They tried to get me to confess, he whispered, his voice hoarse. Said it would be easier if I just admitted it. Despite David's relentless efforts, the legal battle that followed was a grueling, uphill fight. Sheriff Walt Denton's power in that small town, combined with Susan's fabricated testimony and Annie's tragically coerced statements, proved an insurmountable wall. David worked day and night, meticulously gathering evidence, but Denton had woven a tight, corrupt web. Frank's advanced security system, designed to protect his home and family, was ironically twisted by the prosecution. They painted it as evidence of paranoia, a controlling nature, a desire to monitor and isolate his family. The quiet man of science was reframed as a brooding, suspicious figure. The trial became a public spectacle, orchestrated by Denton. Every detail was crafted to portray Frank as an abusive husband and father, eroding his good name and reputation piece by piece. The most devastating blow came when Annie, confused and clearly manipulated, took the stand. Her small voice, shaky but firm, recounted incidents that Frank couldn't recognize, words that were not hers. It was clear she was repeating a script, but to the jury, her youthful vulnerability made her testimony seem heartbreakingly real. The sight of his own daughter testifying against him was a wound that cut deeper than any legal blow, a devastation to Frank's very soul. In the end, the verdict was swift and inevitable. Frank Miller was found guilty. He was sentenced to 5 years in prison, stripped of his freedom, his family, and his good name. The silence in the courtroom after the judge's pronouncement was absolute, broken only by the quiet sobs of a few spectators. David Jenkins fought tirelessly, appealing the verdict, filing motions, pushing every legal avenue he knew. But the system, corrupted by Denton's pervasive influence, remained unyielding. The appeals were denied, the sentence upheld. There was no justice to be found in the courts of Dens. Susan, having achieved her twisted victory, wasted no time. She swiftly filed for divorce, claiming almost all of Frank's assets, fulfilling her earlier threats with ruthless efficiency. His home, his business, his life savings, all were gone, absorbed into the vacuum she and Denton had created. Walt Denton, his power seemingly absolute, continued to operate unchecked, a shadow over the town. He ensured Frank remained locked away, his version of the truth now the official record. During those long 5 years, Annie grew up, her perception of her father irrevocably tainted by the lies and manipulation she had been fed, a chasm growing between them that Frank feared could never be bridged. Released from prison, Frank Miller, now a harder, quieter man, had no intention of disappearing. He carried the weight of 5 lost years, profound betrayal by Susan and Annie, in Walt Denton's corrupt power. His reflection on the past was not sadness, but a cold, quiet determination for justice. He knew he couldn't reclaim the years, but he would ensure the architects of his downfall faced their reckoning. The restraining order, a bitter symbol, also provided a shield, keeping Susan away and giving him space to plan. Frank remembered his hidden security systems, dormant but operational, waiting for his unique codes. He had contacts, people he was supposed to meet, alliances forged in the shadows of injustice during his time away. His journey to the bus station was not an escape, but a measured return, a prelude to a calculated move. The familiar Midwestern landscape, once peaceful, now held the promise of quiet, unyielding retribution. He would navigate the small-town streets of dens, a phantom from the past, observing, gathering, planning every step. The theme of morality, of consequences, would play out outside the flawed courts. Frank Miller's story was far from over. It was merely entering its next darker chapter. He stepped off the bus, the air still crisp from his journey, carrying little more than his small duffel bag and a hardened resolve. The world had shifted, but Frank Miller had not dissolved. 5 years in a cage had chiseled away the softer edges of the man he once was, replacing them with something leaner, quieter, but undeniably tougher. He had no intention of fading into the background, of simply disappearing as the world expected. The weight he carried wasn't physical, it was the indelible mark of 5 lost years, the profound betrayal by Susan, the crushing disappointment from Annie's coerced words, and the insidious power of Sheriff Walt Denton. Each element was a heavy stone in his gut, a constant, dull ache that spurred him forward. His reflection on the past had long since transcended grief, evolving into a cold, quiet determination. Justice, he knew, would not be found in the flawed legal system that had imprisoned him. It would have to be forged by his own hands, on his own terms. He understood he couldn't reclaim the years stolen from him. They were gone like dust scattered by the wind, but he could ensure that the architects of his downfall, the ones who had profited from his pain, would face their reckoning. This wasn't about vengeance in a fit of rage. It was about balance, a precise, calculated reequilibration. The restraining order, that bitter symbol of his ostracization, now served a dual purpose. It kept Susan at a distance, a legal barrier that ironically provided him with the necessary space, the quiet solitude, to think and to plan without immediate interference. He would not violate it, not openly. He remembered his hidden security systems, the intricate networks of cameras and sensors he had designed and installed in his old house. They were dormant now, but still operational, waiting for his unique codes, his touch. He knew the back doors, the blind spots, the vulnerabilities. It was a familiar terrain. During his time away, he hadn't just wasted days. He had observed. He had listened. He had made contacts, people he was supposed to meet, alliances forged in the shadows of injustice. Information, favors owed, quiet understandings. The world inside had its own currency, its own forms of justice. His journey from the prison to the bus station, then the long ride to this quiet, unassuming town, was not an escape. It was a measured return, a prelude to a calculated move. He wasn't running, he was positioning himself. The familiar Midwestern landscape, rolling hills and quiet farmlands, once a scene of his peaceful life, now held the distinct promise of a quiet, unyielding retribution. The simplicity of the scenery belied the complex, dark currents beneath. He would navigate the small-town streets of dens again, not as Frank Miller, the respected engineer, but as a phantom from the past, observing, gathering information, planning every meticulous step. He would be invisible until he chose not to be. The theme of morality, of consequences, would play out not in the flawed courts that had failed him, but in the subtle machinations of a wronged man. A man who understood systems, who knew how to dismantle them from the inside out. Frank Miller's story was far from over. His incarceration had merely marked the end of one chapter. and the quiet beginning of its next, darker iteration. He had been an ordinary man, a quiet engineer who built things, who sought order and logic. But the world, through its cruelty and injustice, had pushed him beyond his limits, transforming him into something else entirely. This would be a chilling tale, not of explosive violence, but of precise, methodical unraveling. A quiet reckoning that would shake the foundations of everyone who thought they had truly silenced him. He was coming back, and they would remember his name.